Honesty is always the best policy, just like your parents always told you growing up, right? The thing is, a lot of this is not rocket science, but it's a commitment to be able to follow it. And if people know you're being truthful with them, you're going to get a lot more of a following and a lot more respect. I mean, I often tell people you don't need to like me as a leader. You just have to understand me as I have to understand you. And I think if they just sit down and talk through it with the employees so that they know you'll do everything you can to help them.
Looking forward to this, Jim. I've been looking forward to this a lot, actually, because I want to hear what the six pillars of effective leadership are and your journey as a leader and how we can all be better leaders and help those that are on our team be better leaders too. But I'm getting ahead of myself before we get there. Jim, would you mind sharing your background and your journey in leadership for our audience?
Sure. So I have been in leadership my entire professional career, beginning in 1983 when I graduated college. And I have seen over the years how leadership has evolved. And the way I lead today is very different than the way I led back in 1983. In that journey and in the last 25 years, I've spent a lot of time helping other leaders develop and being a mentor. And I noticed that what a lot of companies have done is, I'll use you as an example. They'll say, Rebecca, you've done a terrific job at doing X, and we want to make you a manager. And you're going to now manage this team of 15 or 8 people over here on the right. So good luck and let us know if you need any help. And they push you out of the nest and you walk into the new team and you don't have a roadmap to follow. And the first mistake a leader does in that situation is they start talking, which is the last thing that a leader should do. The first thing they should do is say hello and listen and get feedback, and don't start pontificating direction until you really understand the team dynamics, the goals, everything that they've been through. Because if you do anything other than that, you're going to fail. So my journey encompasses all of that. And my theme is leaders are not born that way, they're developed.
Yeah.
And I can say that because if I look at my genetic history and family history, my dad was a carpenter. His dad was a mason. My great grandfather was a chicken farm. CEO or president or executive vice president or director or manager is not in any of those DNAs within the family on the male or female side. And so when I look at my journey, it was truly impacted by some truly great leaders that I worked for that helped guide me, that I took different pieces from to form really where I am today.
I love that. And there's so much that I align with and resonates. Your scenario of those leaders who are promoted because they're really great at their specialty and yet they're not taught how to lead people speaks to so many different conversations I had with a lot of other folks who and some of the women that I mentor in their roles and in their positions, they haven't necessarily been nurtured into that role. And it can feel very daunting and very overwhelming. I would say for myself, I experienced that early enough in my career. And I was in an industry at the time, the theater industry, that is very much collaborative and at the same time not necessarily also teaching the best leadership practices either. So similar to you, I got to experience both great leaders and see bad boss examples of how not to lead people. And I've also been in a leadership position where you have managers who are really great at their specialty and their role, and you're moving them into people management. And it takes that extra care and diligence in their development to ensure that they're taking best care of their people. So everything that you're sharing and describing is incredibly valuable and helpful in any stage, I think, in a person's career, because you might be mentoring others who need that training, or you yourself might be stepping into that new role. So, Jim, if we are stepping into that new role, or if we're helping other people in that role, what are the six pillars? Tell me all about it. I want to hear all about it so our audience can get that education and information from you.
So the 6 pillars, and I'll put them in well, not necessarily priority order, except for the very first one. The very first pillar, which I call the non-negotiable pillar, is integrity. And I think in the world today, we need integrity more than we ever have in probably my lifetime. I think that the impact of social media, the impact of the political world we live in, and the world we live in outside of the United States has led us to a point where I think human behavior has gotten sidetracked, and we lack it. And I actually began leading with integrity way back in 1983, before it was in vogue, and before people like me were talking about how important it is to be transparent and to have absolute integrity. How and it's an interesting story how it hit me too, because when I the way I lead today, again, if I look at the team I first led in 1983, I think I need to go back and apologize to all of them, because back then it was still a carryover from the 70s, still more authoritarian and I don't want to say dictatorship, but really directing people at a task level versus collaborating on a goal and helping people create a roadmap to get to that goal. And it hit me 1983, May of 1983, I graduated from college. And in November of 1983, I got elected to public office in the small town I grew up in as a city councilman. And shortly after the election, the city administrator asked to talk to me. And I went in to meet with him. He congratulated me, told me I would do great, thought I was a very smart guy. I had him fooled just like I had fooled everybody else. And we sat down and we were chatting, and he paused and he said, "Now I want to ask you for a favor." And I said, "Okay." He said, "I want you to ask yourself this one question every night when you go to bed, just as you're putting your head on the pillow. And that question is, did I do anything today for my own personal self benefit that was at the expense of another individual, group of individuals, or organization?" He said, "If you answer yes, you need to do two things: figure out how to unwind it and figure out how to never do it again. If you can say no to that question, you can rest peacefully." I have asked myself that question every day since 1983. And it has created kind of my leadership, kind of not forcefulness, but it's also created a significant following of people who have worked with me, who want to work with me again because they know they're not going to be misled. They know that I have their back. They know that I'm not going to be sending them down misdirections just to confuse them. And I'm not the type of manager that just brings in people and rotates management people like chairs on the Titanic. And you're smiling because you can relate to that. And we've all had leaders who have done that. And ultimately, the Titanic is still going to sink. It just takes time to expose that lack of leadership in that individual. But to me, if a leader is not operating with transparency and complete integrity, they're doing a disservice to the people and to the organization they're part of. So that's pillar number one. It's followed by compassion and empathy, which really are two different things, but similar. Focus and stability. And the last one, which usually intrigues everybody, is humor. I want to qualify that by saying I'm not suggesting people need to be a stand up comedian at the water cooler. I'm suggesting to use that in leadership or in management in certain situations to diffuse a tense situation in a meeting, to redirect people, or to organize them as you kick off a meeting, and to show that your team and others that you're a human. And by showing a little humor, people start to let their guard down and understand that you're just like them. And it's it has served me very, very well in many situations of conflict and otherwise. So I want to be careful that people don't get too hung up on humor, but I really think it's a valuable tool.
I love that. I agree. There's a nuance and a complexity to humans. And to your point, having that sense of humor can help diffuse some of those challenging situations that we find ourselves in, some of the tension that happens in normal, everyday personal life as well as business and our work life. And I appreciate you pointing out the sort of disclaimer there too. It's not about sending memes via email to your team or finding inappropriate jokes in the moment, right? It's about knowing when to create some levity when the tone and the context of the situation may be taking that downward turn and finding ways to, I think, laugh and smile with folks because that can be a huge, just that physical release for people when they are facing some difficult conversations too.
Absolutely. I'm totally on board with that. In fact, our society today is super hypersensitive. And to your point, inappropriate humor is not what we're talking about. In fact, most of the time it's self deprecating humor and me telling a story of something stupid or funny that I did, or how I fell down the stairs, or how I did something, and or what my kid, when my kids made fun of me or whatever, so that I can take the concern away that it's not going to be a target at somebody's ethnic background or where they grew up, or how they live in society or whatever, because that doesn't belong.
Yeah, I appreciate that point too. If you're poking fun at yourself, then everybody can laugh and they can feel the sense that not only are you human, but you have a humility about you and you have a self awareness too. I like to use that with my team, and it also makes me think of the idea of being the first person to either apologize or admit you don't know something, or when something is wrong, saying that, hey, this is where I was responsible. And that is a mark of a great leader, someone who can go first in those scarier or tense or difficult moments and take the responsibility. And in that case, it's, responsibility for lightening everybody's spirits and the mood.
Mhm.
You also mentioned compassion and empathy, and that they are very different things for our audience's sake, and both of us here too. Can you explain what the difference is and how we can put that compassion into action and empathy into action for our team and maybe even for ourselves?
Yeah, I think so. It's very difficult, I found, to find a book to teach yourself compassion or empathy. It's really through life lessons. And to me, I kind of separate the two between, in compassion, I can potentially solve a problem for you. In empathy, I can't solve it, but I can help you. I can guide you. And I'll give you an example that I use in the book on empathy. And at one point in time, I was in charge of a couple of different teams within a IT software company. And one of the teams that we had, and this goes back to the early 2000s, and when Windows was really starting to dominate versus the old green, you may not be old enough to remember old green screen technology where you didn't have a mouse. So you maybe you anyway, we won't get into age. I've been around a long time, but I had to tell this group of 25 people that we were going to be doing away with that old technology, and that we were going to migrate our customers to Windows based technology. And that migration would probably take at least 2 years, if not 3 years, because typical implementations in healthcare run about 8 months to 15 months, depending on the platform. And I really struggled with what I was going to say to them, because I didn't know how they would react, but I couldn't afford for everybody to jump ship, because we had customers we had to take care of until we converted them or until they left to go to another organization's platform. And I really wrestled for a long time and finally sat down and I said, what would I want my boss to say to me? And so I came up with three things. And my sole goal was selfish for the company. I couldn't afford for people to quit before it was time for them to leave. So I made three commitments to them. Again, I couldn't solve it, but I could try to help them. The first commitment was every individual would be given as much time as feasibly possible to know when their job would go away. So if we knew that we were converting three customers in 8 months, let's keep the math simple, three customers means I have to reduce three people, hypothetically. Those three people would know that in 8 months or 10 months, whatever the project plan is, that job that they're in today is not going to be there. The second thing I committed to was anyone within the team that wanted to learn the new technology, if they were an engineer, or learn how we were going to support the organization, the customers in the new support organization. If anyone wanted to transition to that, I would provide the training during work hours over the period of time leading up to when their position would end. And then I made a third promise. I told them that I would physically help any individual who didn't want to stay with the organization find a job outside the organization that fit their skill set and what they needed financially to support their family. Good news is I accomplished the goal that nobody left before their time came. 100% of the people stayed. About a year and a half into this, I get a call from human resources asking to come speak to me. Now, it wasn't my boss coming to speak to me, but it was human resources. So I felt a little less stress. And two people from human resources sat down in front of me and they said, "We need to talk about this team that you have out in Oakland, California." And I said, "Uh oh." And they said, "Yeah, it's the team that you're displacing." And I said, "Yeah." And they said, "Well, do you remember about 45 days ago, we did an employee satisfaction survey?" I said, "Yeah. How bad is it?" "Well, that's the problem. They have the highest satisfaction score of any department or group of people in the entire 20,000 person company we were part of. Why?" And I said, "I have no idea." And they said, "These people know they're losing their job, but they're happy." And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that even though I didn't solve the problem for them, I took all the stress away. They didn't need to, there were no surprises. You knew if you were going to stay because you were getting trained as you're in your current job for the next role. If you knew you didn't want to stay, we're already looking for a job for you on the outside, and they didn't have to take stress home with them and worry about it. And so the lesson that I learned was when you really stand up for your people and they understand you have their back, they're going to be more loyal and committed regardless of what the end result is. Because at the end of that road, there was no job for them, right? Unless we moved them to a new position or unless they found a job on the outside or whatever. But again, they didn't have any stress in it.
Jim, that is a powerful story and really speaks to that care and influence that as leaders we should be striving to get to and develop for ourselves so that we can care for our people in a way that produces that kind of satisfaction and happiness regardless of the situation or what the outcome might be. That is an incredible story, and I really appreciate you sharing that with me. I
Well,
know that there are some times when maybe as a leader, you know that there's some bad news to deliver. And maybe, I see a lot of messages on LinkedIn about layoffs, and in the tech world, it's incredibly challenging right now. And a lot of friends in that world are experiencing some of those situations. So if there is, maybe a similar type of scenario where folks are expecting layoffs and leaders are responsible for those people, but they might not have the leadway to help people develop for that extended period of time. What's some advice that you might give to someone who wants to be that caring, compassionate leader, and at the same time, they feel the pressure of not having enough time to maybe train people into a new role, or the job market being incredibly challenging for folks as it is? How would you advise and counsel them right now?
I think what I would do is I would be very open and honest about the situation that we're all experiencing. We've got double digit inflation. We've got people cutting back. We've got the government, and I'm in the healthcare sector. So we've got the government saying, well, we're going to cut back on all of this stuff and not defining anything in this big, beautiful bill. So nobody knows. And there's a lot of inaction going on and everybody's worried. Honesty is always the best policy, just like your parents always told you growing up, right? The thing is, a lot of this is not rocket science, but it's a commitment to be able to follow it. And if people know you're being truthful with them, you're going to get a lot more of a following and a lot more respect. I mean, I often tell people you don't need to like me as a leader. You just have to understand me as I have to understand you. And I think if they just sit down and talk through it with the employees so that they know you'll do everything you can to help them, not that you're going to go behind your office door and close it and they see nothing but a wall and then just have to guess that the demise is coming shortly. So I like to handle things straight on and upfront and not delay them. There's actually a lecturer out there who has a book on, it's called Crucial Conversations, and it's really about having the conversations that we need to have with employees without putting them off. I view my role as a leader to be able to know a day that you aren't yourself and something's going on in your life that could be impacting your work. And as leaders, we have to be aware of that and be able to deal with that. Even in our remote work world today, I mean, we're on a Zoom-like call right now, and my entire team is remote. And so I have at least 2 meetings a week with each person that reports to me. One is a team meeting and one is a one-on-one meeting. But often I can sense things in email or in just separate conversations on a specific sales opportunity or an existing account opportunity, and we'll get on a quick Teams call and have a face-to-face kind of conversation. And I can see when there's stress on somebody's face, and I can say to them, "Hey, you don't look yourself today. Is everything okay?" And we've got to help them through that emotional time frame of what's going on in the world around us.
Jim, I so appreciate that perspective, and we're very much alike in that my world is remote as well. We're Slack and Zoom, but same idea, right? We have our weekly meeting and then we have our one-on-one. And something that I had to learn very quickly in managing a remote team is that you have to pick up on those nonverbal cues, what's happening in the written word and the form of their communication, and then also the what you're getting from them when you see their face, because even though we might not be physically in the same space, I do feel like you can pick up on energy and you can sense when something's off. And I also want to point out too that understanding that when our team members are experiencing something, it's going to affect their work life. And that's where I personally believe that the work life balance is a myth, because I personally wouldn't want 50-50 work and life. I don't want that very clear balance. And maybe we like more personal life and to experience that. But then we also know that sometimes there's work that takes extra priority or effort, and we need to allow for that ebb and flow. And at the same time, whatever is happening in both of those different worlds is going to affect the other. And it is not fair as leaders if we are not allowing for that same reciprocal transparency that you're talking about. So I appreciate you sharing that, because I've heard a lot and also experienced too that idea of keeping things from people so that you don't scare them or frighten them or make them feel something that is negative. And I find that can be very damaging in the long run, because you're not giving them the time that we're talking to in processing and making plans for themselves, because it's not just their work, it's their life, and how it affects the rest of their life will be determined by the choices that they need to make based on the choices that you as a leader or a company are making.
Absolutely agree with you 100%. Totally aligned with you on that. Absolutely.
So tell me about stability, because we're also talking about the instability in the world. And we as leaders want to create that stability. So, how do we get there?
So when I think of stability, try to think of, and also one of the things about my book is I don't portray to be the expert on leadership. And so in my book, I talk about these pillars. I'll talk about a personal story around that pillar, but I also will tell in the book other leaders around the world that use that pillar in their management style. And so in terms of stability, I wrote about Warren Buffett. Now, unfortunately, I'm going to have to rewrite my book because he's retiring, but I don't think he'll ever get out of the business. Warren Buffett has done the same process, the same thing since he was 12 years old and he made his first investment in an underperforming company and bought stock. And so the people around him, even though he's going to be walking away from the day to day, those people knew what to expect day to day. The companies may have changed, but his process was stable and he never veered away from that process and became not only a wealthy man, but he also became, has a very wealthy organization and has done a tremendous amount of good for this country. And so when I think of somebody who epitomizes stability, I really think Warren Buffett's at the top of that list. Now, there's others, but he's going to do, if he said, hey, market's down, that even if the market's down or up, he's still doing the same thing in the same way.
I wonder, does that idea of stability also extend to a consistency or maybe an authenticity and a genuineness in how we as leaders are consistent in how our actions match and align with who we say we are and what we say we stand for, which then in turn actually leads back to the integrity that we began the conversation with. If we are that person of integrity, then people can count on us to be who we say we are to them.
I absolutely agree with that as well. You know, it's funny. In my book, I have 6 pillars. I started with like 18, and I said, I can't write a book about 18 things and ask people to implement them. So I really had to work hard because clarity is in that, consistency is in the broader sense of it. And I really wanted to try to condense it to the 6. Well, actually, I didn't try to condense it to 6. I tried to condense the list, and where it fell, it fell. But I felt that these 6 were critical things that I see missing a lot, that could help people the most. So yes, there's a lot of other characteristics. That doesn't mean I'm writing a second book at the moment, but there are a lot of other characteristics that leaders need in addition to these 6.
And I think you're making a really important point that oftentimes I'll see leadership listed as a soft skill, if you will, that people need to develop. And yet, leadership is all of these pillars that you're talking about and then some. And we have to strengthen those muscles to become a leader. And it almost feels unfair to tell people, well, go and get leadership skills or develop your leadership without identifying which element, which pillar do you need to strengthen the most. So I'm going to ask you an unfair, I think, question, Jim, because they're all important. But if you were to say which is the pillar that people should consistently work on and something that we should always keep in mind as a leader, what would that one pillar be?
I would say I'm going to give you 2 because people often confuse them. I would say the compassion and the empathy. If there's one thing that people are measured on the most, is whether they see you as an approachable, compassionate, or empathetic person as a leader. And as much as I say that integrity is the non negotiable one, that's the center pillar that's holding up the peak of the roof. But compassion and empathy, if you want your team to follow you, integrity will get you so far, but if they're not certain about your compassion and empathy and that you care about them as people and individuals as opposed to a displaceable employee, they're not going to believe in your vision. They're not going to be a committed person. They'll always be out there looking for another job. You know, to me, leadership is not an 8 to 5 thing. I had someone ask me every day, when does your leadership kick in? Does it kick in when you sit down at your desk? And I said, no, it kicks in when my feet hit the floor and I get up in the morning because everything I do from that point forward has an impact on somebody or someone, including if I'm just driving. And if I'm not exhibiting that same beliefs and behaviors while I'm driving or when I get to the parking lot and I'm walking into the building, then I'm not being true to myself or to others as a leader.
It's that idea that how you do one thing is how you do everything. And I'll give the caveat that we as humans have duality and complexity. So we might not always be consistent with ourselves, yet at the same time, and emphasizing, aligning with what you're saying here, we're always a leader. So, when I think about how I'm going to start my day is exactly what you're saying. It's going to dictate the rest of the day and how I approach people. And that's where I like to do a little bit of a self check in if I'm feeling off or I'm feeling unwell or something is causing a disruption, then being mindful of that and being able to adjust so that I'm not taking that with me into the team and they have to feel any negative effect of that. And at the same time, ending on a positive too, if we are experiencing that joy and excitement, making sure that we're sharing that and being that light for our team as well. So I appreciate you sharing that, Jim, and everything that you've shared with us is so insightful and inspiring. I hope everybody grabs a copy of the book. Where would you like people to find it online and connect with you to get more of that insight and dive deeper?
So the book's available on my website, which is just www.jimcarlough, my name all squished together.com. It's also available via Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Roku, Lulu, and it's also available at books period by by/Jim Carlough. And so it's available in all of those places. If you would like an autographed copy, though, just ping me on my website, send me a note from the contact form, and I'll gladly put one in the mail to you. So,
Well, I love that. That's very exciting. Well, I hope everybody reaches out for the autograph copy. Otherwise, there are plenty of places. We'll have them all linked below where folks can grab their copy of the book. I know I'm going to grab mine so that I can dive deeper into those pillars and take it back to my team too. Because remember, you might already be a leader and working on these yourself, but we also have team members that are looking for and hungering for that great growth and that training. So I really appreciate you, Jim, and your time and all of the knowledge that you've shared with us. Thank you to our audience for listening to another episode of Bad Bosses, Great Leaders podcast.